Now, for this example, I just have a long set of data here. You can go ahead and fill out your sheet, the practice sheet. Just go from there. I made a copy of that I'll call the video sheet here. And you can see that it just has a long list of transactions. It doesn't have any other information other than the pocket revenue here in column A, and then the pocket profit of that transaction in column B. Now, these terms I'm using here, I'm just using pocket revenue and pocket profits to avoid any ambiguity with terms like this. If you were to go to an actual accounting textbook, when you talk about gross profit margin, that's generally considered the quantity of net sales minus your COGS, and then you divide that total quantity by the net sales. Using the language I have here, the gross profit margin would be the quantity of your pocket revenue minus cost, or your pocket profit, and then divide that total amount by the pocket revenue. So we're just going to do that, just very quickly fill this out, the gross profit margin for each one of these transactions. And once again, just using that formula, pocket profit divided by pocket revenue. And if you want, you could also turn that into a percentage. And we will just double click in the right corner to extend that all the way down. If you hold down the control button and use any of your arrow keys, it will slide all the way down a data set. So we can just quickly double check that formula was extended all the way down the bottom. With control up, we'll go back up here to the top, and now we want the percentage of pocket revenue. For each of these transactions, you have to figure out what percentage of the total pocket revenue does that line item represent. So here in the pocket revenue column, I'm actually going to jump all the way down here at the bottom, put a space or so. We'll put a sum, Control B, Control U to bold and underline, and we're just going to calculate the sum of this column. And if you, when you have the bottom selected like that, here we'll just do that again real quick. The very bottom selected, if you hit Control, Shift, and your up arrow, it will fly all the way up to the very top. And then if you release the control, and just with your Shift key still held in, if you press the down arrow once, it will move that selection down one. So when you have control, it jumps all around. Shift just allows you to highlight adjacent cells. So with that selected like that, oh, and actually, I forgot to put in the sum. So we'll do sum, parenthesis, and then in that parenthesis right there. And this will give us the total sum of this column, almost $263 million in pocket revenue. So for jumping back up here into column D for the percentage of pocket revenue, if you just do an equal, select the pocket revenue that you have here in column A, and then divide it. We're going to jump all the way down to the bottom. I'll use control again to jump down quickly. And I'm going to select that. And when you have that sum selected at the very bottom, hit the F4 button on your keyboard. If you're on a laptop and you have to hit you may have to hit a function key before you hit your F4 key. But however you need your F4 key to work, just press that while you have the final sum there at the bottom highlighted, and you will get dollar signs that will appear before the row and column for that cell reference. Dollar sign, that's an absolute reference. So in Excel, when you take your formula and you move it over one column, you copy and paste it over one column, then the cell reference will move, all of the references will move over by one column as well, unless you have it locked down with a dollar sign. Whenever you have something locked down with a dollar sign, no matter matter how many rows or columns you move it, that reference is going to be locked as long as you have dollar signs before the row and the column. And if you do hit the F4 button more than once, you'll just cycle through the different combinations. So if you hit it one more time, only the 7305 in the reference is locked down. So that's the row. If you hit F4 one more time, then just the column would be locked down. And then finally hit it again, and then you have a relative reference. No dollar signs at all, but we want dollar signs before both the row and the column. So, just like that, and you can take that and extend it down. And then when you do highlight this entire column, you should see that the sum should be exactly 1. It's all that, if this were in percentage formatting, then that would show up as 100% right here at the bottom, the sum. I could even extend it out a little bit to see, and it should be exactly 100% because that's all of the pocket revenue that we have in our data set, right? Okay. For the next part, we actually want to create the buckets, the bins that will be used in our histogram for organizing the gross profit margin. Essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to go through all these transactions. We're going to take a look at what the gross profit margin is for that specific transaction, and then we're going to throw that transaction into one of these buckets that we're creating. So, for instance, the very first gross profit margin of 44%, we'll create buckets that are 10 percentage points wide. So that would fit between the 40% and 50% bucket for gross profit margin. So what does that look like? Well, let's see. I know that we have some negative numbers here, so I'm going to set the upper limit for the very first bucket at 0%. For the lower, the next bucket down, or the next bucket to the right, that is going to be, the lower amount will be the exact same, and the upper amount is going to be the lower amount plus 10% or 0.1, like that. And if we just take that, select that, move it down, let's see, we only have to go up to, let's go just over 100. And actually for this one, I want this to be a very large number, just to make sure we capture everything. And then for the lower down here, I'm going to actually just do a -1 times the upper number down here. Just have some nice symmetry. We can just copy and paste that formatting. Okay, now these are the actual numbers we have here in columns G and H. Well, we actually are going to have to turn that into a text string to be able to format it appropriately in an aesthetically pleasing manner on our actual chart itself. So we're going to use a text format, or a text function rather, and that's just going to be simply, it has 2 parameters, whatever the value is that you're using, so we're just going to use the lower amount for that row, and then whatever text formatting you're using. For this text formatting, you have to put it in double quotes, and ours is just simply, we want it to show up as a percentage. So if you do 0%, that will give you a percentage to 1 decimal place. Well, it will show a whole number as a percentage rather. And we'll just end that like that. Okay. And then we'll just copy this over to label 2. And then we'll highlight both of the formulas, click and drag it down, just like that. Okay, so that takes care of our labels. So now we actually have to, for what we have here in column L and M, this is going to be the cells that plug directly into our chart that we're creating. So for the gross profit margin here, let's see, let's actually hop down one, because the first and last one are a little interesting because we have that very negative number and the very large positive number. So we are just going to start with the second one here. That's simply, we're going to do a concatenation here, which is just a fancy way of saying we're going to join two strings together. Like if you were to take someone's first name and then add a space and then add in their last name, taking those three items together, you can go from first name, space, last name to a full name, right? If you combine all three of those things together. We're going to do something similar because we're going to have the lower limit, we're going to have a connector string, and then we're going to have the upper limit. And how that works in Excel is you just have equal, and you select your first one. We're going to use the label cell because that has been formatted as a text in the percentage format, like what we want. So just select the first cell, hit the ampersand symbol, and that allows you to concatenate. And then we're going to put in a text string. And text strings, you put them in double quotation marks. So it's just going to be a double quotation, a space, the word to, another space, and then you're going to end that text string. So that's going to be the middle connector, and then add another ampersand, and we're going to grab the second half of our label, the upper limit, and just like that, let's see, except for that last one. And just like that, we have exactly what we want here. Now, just for your own curiosity, this is what would happen if you would have just put in those numbers as opposed to using the text formatting. You see, it even though they're showing up as percentages because we have it formatted like that in Excel, behind the scenes, those are just floating decimals. They're just floating point numbers, and if you don't specify that you actually, when you put it, in our case, through the text function, if you don't specify, I want this to show up as a percentage, Excel won't show it up as, it won't show up as a percentage when you plug it in here. So we'll just fix that back. Good old Control Z to do a quick undo. And then everything's back just the way we want it. And the last thing I want to do here is I want to do something about the first and last bin, the first and last bucket. So we'll do an equal, we'll put this in quotes because we want this to come out as a string and not for Excel to try to do any math with this. So the very first one we're going to say less than 0%. And in that, and we are going to go down here, and we will do, I have to flip it around the other way, going to be greater than 100%. Okay, and now time for the big equation. It's going to be a SUMIFs equation, and the way a SUMIFs equation works is that you feed it, you let it know, hey, there's this column of data, and I want to sum that up. But I want to sum it up based on certain criteria that I'm going to give you. So, instance, for us, what we want is we want the percentage of pocket revenue to be summed up here in column M. So we're going to be summing up everything here in column D, but for the cell here in M where we're putting the formula, we only want to sum up the pocket revenue that is between the lower and upper limits for this row, because that's for a specific bin. It's for a very specific bucket. So what that looks like is like this. We can do equals SUMIFs, and we start with the sum range. So whatever we're adding up. So I'm just going to select the very top, the very first number here, cell D10, and I'm going to use that Control-Shift trick now. So Control-Shift, hold them both down, and then hit the down arrow key. Okay? And now, while that is still highlighted, hit your F4 button to give you dollar signs on both both the column and the row for both numbers in that range. So just like that. So Control Shift down to select the entire column. While it's still highlighted, hit F4 to give yourself those dollar signs. And then we can just continue with the formula, continue typing. You can just hit comma, and that goes on to the next parameter in your function. That's the criteria range. So for the rest of the SUMIF's formula, it just alternates back and forth between give me a criteria range that you want me to check against where we're summing, in this case column D, so it does have to be an array of the exact same length, so it will be from the same data set. And then you give it the actual criteria that you want to apply, whatever conditions you want to apply to that criteria range that determines whether or not you're going to sum it up in this case. So what that looks like for us is we're just going to grab we're going to use the lower limit for the first time, for the first criteria. We're going to use the upper limit for the second criteria, and we just have to put in the criteria range that is the gross profit margin, because that's what the lower and upper limits for your bin are actually for. So what that looks like here, criteria range is, we're going to do the gross profit margin here in column C. Once again, Control Shift down, and then while that is still selected, use F4 to get dollar signs before your rows and your columns. I'm going to do a comma, and then we get to do our criteria range. Now you do have to put an inequality in here, and when you do that for the SUMIF's function, you have to make sure that you put the inequality, double quotes around it, and you have to use an ampersand to connect that to your actual cell reference. So in order for this to work right, you have to use just a less than on one and a greater than or equal to on the other. So what that looks like is, I have to put in the quotes there, and then use the ampersand, and we'll use the greater than on the lower. So what that's saying is that applying to column C, where the criteria range 1 is, the criteria 1 is I want it to be, it has to be greater than the lower limit there in that column G. And we can go on to the next section here, our second criteria range, which it's actually just going to be column C once again. And use F4 to get your dollar signs, absolute reference values locked in. And then we just change the inequality symbol here. So double quotes again. We use a less than or equal to, and we're only using the equal sign in one of the two inequality signs. This is the way if you were to use the actual histogram tool in Excel, this is how it would do the calculation of the bins for you, with the less than or equal to on your upper limit. Okay, throw in the ampersand, we grab that upper limit. That should be enough. Then we'll put this into a percentage, to a couple decimal places, just to, see how far out it goes, make sure it all adds up to 100. We'll click drag down. Okay, when we highlight there, okay, we have exactly 100%. And actually, it looks like we don't need this final bin because there's actually nothing above 90%. So I am going to move this down. We'll call this greater than 90. And delete that as well. Okay, now we have everything plugged in. Time to create our graph. So insert, just do a 2D column. Second option here is a stacked column. And actually, we can do a clustered column because we don't actually have more than one series here. Okay, a couple of things right away. All right. Let's make that a little larger. And let's change this label. Pocket price band. Okay, over here we can format the axis. Just right click on it, and then over on the right hand side here, all of your options will pop up. What we want is we want to change the number here. We do want it as a percentage, but we don't need any decimal places because they're whole percentages there. You don't need all those extra decimal places. And for this here, we actually want to format the bottom axis. What I want is, if you go over to this option here, size and properties, second from the right, the text direction. I'm going to turn that rotate all text to 70 so that it shows up horizontally like that. Excuse me, shows up vertically like that. All right, and I don't need these gaps, so select the data series here so that all of your bars highlight like that. This gap width, put it down to 0%. And series overlap, 0%. And, yeah, while we have it selected, go to border, and I would put in a solid line, give it like a nice white, so there's some contrast, and when you select off to see, yeah, you can see you have those nice bright contrast in between your various bins. We don't have axis titles, so let's add that. And this is the percent of pocket revenue. And this is the gross profit margin. Okay, and that looks all done. Yeah, so just like that, we have a complete pocket price span.